Welcome back. It's now time to have a look at some of the front pages of today's newspapers. And we'll start with the Daily Trust newspaper, which the lead story says why FG may not implement Orasanya report before 2023. And the story has two riders. There are interest in maintaining status quo, ex-PAMSEC says. And then we are reviewing white paper for implementation according to government. Details of the story is on page 4, and on the front page you can see the beautiful infograph, showing details of some of the recommendations and the journey of the report since the committee was inaugurated in August 2011. Some other stories to the left of the infograph: most Nigerian roads have expired according to FEMA. Story on page 3. And 2023 State Police Economy Dominates Second Arise TV CDD Town Hall. Story on page 39. And lastly, Adamawa BDC operators reject dollars as Naira rebounds. Details of that story is on page 7 of today's Daily Trust newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at the Nation newspaper. The lead story here talks about APC. Tinubu remains a solid, reliable candidate. We have riders on that story that says fake news won't help opposition candidates to engage Nigerians in diaspora. And then we also have a story on Wike, others not keen on truce with Atiku, Bauchi governor in dilemma. We have food shortage, forex crisis push up inflation. At the top of the page there, Buhari Oshomole will be to open projects in Rivers. You can find details of that on page 4. Senate panel queries Nati over 960 million naira for 43 officials. We also have Gates Foundation votes $1.4 billion for agric in Nigeria. Others, details on page 5. My surgery experience by Vice President Obasanjo. And just below the nameplate there, you have after collecting 3 million naira ransom, bandits demand 10 million naira to release victim's body. And on the footnote there, Lagos Chief of Staff loses wife and Democrats retain control of U.S. Senate. And these are some of the stories you can find on the Nation newspaper.
Up next is the Punch newspaper, where it has a lot of stories. At the top of the page, rising inflation drives consumption spending to 53 trillion. Story on page 17 actually. And then COVID-19 opened 371,100 Nigerian children, according to report. CBN releases $3.5 billion for foreign education under Buhari. Story on page 17. Why Nigeria made top cholera cases worldwide again, NCDC DG. Story on page 3. And the lead story, national carrier domestic airlines ask courts to terminate FG Ethiopian airline deal. Story on page 2. It has some riders. Air Peace, Azman Airlines seek withdrawal of Nigerian air license. AGF Malami, Ethiopian Airlines, Srika, Nigerian Air listed as dependents. And, just below that is a pictorial showing presidential debate last night. Debate presidential candidate lambast FG for corruption, insecurity. Story on page 12. And then at the bottom of the page, flood affected 3.2 million Nigerians, 1.4 million displaced, according to the United Nations. Story on page 30. And then missing businesswoman found killed by Lagos one chance robbers. And then lastly, Celestial Church sacks guard, apologizes for attacking Punch man. Story on page 5.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to the Guardian newspaper. Lead story here says over 10 million Nigerians have diabetes, kills more than COVID-19 cancer. We have some riders here. Condition major cause of blindness, kidney failure, heart attack, strokes, lower limb amputation, says Emson. There are only 150 endocrinologists to over 220 million Nigerians. Physical exercise restores brain insulin sensitivity, may protect against type 2 diabetes, And stakeholders seek clarity on implementation of sugar tax. And at the top of the page there you have sponsoring fake news won't win elections, says APC PCC. Details of that can be found on page 3. Uduagan declares support for COA 6 unity in PDP. Failings of the National Assembly. Most Nigerian roads are expired, says Firmer. And just below the page there you have petrol scarcity. Marketers accuse Nimasa NPA of dollarizing transaction. And Showore Adebayo Sani Umeadi take turns at Arise TV Town Hall. Set 2023 agenda. These are some of the stories that made it to the front page of the Guardian newspaper this morning.
Okay, and let's move on now to this day newspaper, where the lead story says, at Arise Presidential Hall Series 2, candidates harp on economy security. Showore, I will ensure a new constitution is evolved. Adebayo, wrong security architecture responsible for our woes. Sani, rule of law, antidote to economic poverty. Umedi, my commitment to state police, sacrosanct. And then at the top of the page, at the very top, Naira redesign. CBN moves to protect unbanked, vulnerable in rural communities, says banking public response to policy positive. Attacks on INEC offices, threat to 2023 elections, says Obi Media Office. Story on page 65. And then, at the bottom of the page, you can see a pictorial of Lagos State Governor Igwe of Okija, His Royal Highness Igwe Emeka Okwezi Okejola, and Chairman CEO Obi Jackson Group and Obi Jackson Foundation, Mr. Ernest Ozedode Obiajesi, Lagos State Governor Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, and Director of B&Q Dredging and Construction, Mr. Emmanuel Obiajeshi, during the Governor's Commission of Obi Jackson Center and Town Union Building donated by to the Okija community in Lagos, meant to unify and bring peace on the 31 villages of Okija on Saturday. So these are the details on the front page of this day newspaper this morning.
All right, with that, we'll move on to the analysis of some of these stories. And we have our guest in the studio already. His name is Mukhtar Suleiman. He's a public affairs analyst joining us for the newspaper review.
One of the things I've observed over the past few weeks is whenever she says my name, she smiles. So it's nice.
Because he's always here on Mondays.
He's here on Monday, yeah. So it's a sign that when you see him, you see Monday.
Exactly. So, thank you so much for joining us. All right, so let's begin with the lead story on Daily Trust, a newspaper that talks about why federal government may not implement Orosanye report before 2023. And after all this time, the government is saying they're still reviewing the white paper.
Well, I didn't really reviewing the white paper. I think the work that Mr. Steve Orosanye did and his team did in 2012 is actually one of the best things that have happened. I've already 800 pages of the document, but I've seen reviews, I've heard commentaries about it, even as far back as when it just came out at the time. However, it is no secret, or it is no surprise to me that the government has been reluctant about implementing the recommendations that the report actually gave. And I think one of the strongest recommendations it gave was to reduce the 263 MDAs we have in the country into 160, if I'm not mistaken, around that amount, and just to cut the cost of governance. And in that period of time, within that time, in the past 10 years, we've seen the creation of more MDAs as opposed to even the reduction of the MDAs. And this goes to show you that the government has its own stake. I remember reading the reports when I was coming on my way from the house, and the what's his name, the former PAM secretary stated that one of the major issues is that people have vested interest, most especially the National Assembly, because for every time there's an allocation of project or anything, they always keep their own cut, and which is a thing we've seen in the country. But it's so funny how nothing has been done about this. This is an former PAMSEC saying this. That's to show you that he's not saying it out of the blue, or he's not just speculating. He's actually sure and very certain of what he's talking about. So if this is the case, then why shouldn't the government do anything? From my own angle, I'm seeing it as that they are scared. Nobody wants to lose their political capital, their political might, and if you do this, you're going to step on a lot of toes. But then again, for you to do the right thing, sometimes it actually costs
something.
it actually has to cost something. It's one of the reasons why, and I say this without love or hate or anything, but it's one of the reasons why I admire Malam Nasir El-Rufai and his own approach to governance and what needs to be done. Yes, he has his flaws and his lapses and so many other things that are wrong with that, but sometimes for progress to be made, certain drastic decisions needs to be taken. And I remember that when Boss Mustafa was being sworn into office, he hammered on the Orusanye report and why there is need for us to implement it because the cost of governance is too much, and that should be one of his top priorities. And it's been almost 8 years now, and nothing has been done.
But then, some people say that the implementing the report may not really do the magic a lot of people are expecting, that it may not actually cut down the cost of governance that much, because especially the government is reassuring that there will not be retrenchment, it's those mergers and all that, or people will be taken to another place. Don't you think that in that case it may not be really worth it?
I think it's really the start. When you merge the MDAs together, it means that you're moving people. You're going to move people around. That means most of the recurrent expenditure that spends to keep the lights on in most of these offices would go. Most government organizations actually rent office spaces. So, and that's a problem. So if the government has to rent office spaces, that means they are paying rent every year to a particular private real estate agency, which is obviously an issue. So I think the implementation of it is a start. It leads to retrenchment, perhaps eventually, because by the time we begin to see duplication of roles, then maybe that might lead to improvement of capacity of each of the staff, which might also ensure that.
All right, well, we have to cut you off here, but then we'll take a quick break, and when we return, we'll continue with the newspaper review.
TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
It's still Daybreak on Trust TV, and the show is, the newspaper review segment will continue. Mukhtar, but just before you continue your analysis, there's an interesting cartoon on page 21 of Daily Trust, and it shows two characters, and one of them is saying, "Uncle, why do Nigerians keep blaming the president when the naira is depreciating, and when it started appreciating, they don't praise him?" And then the other character replies, "I think people tend to realize they have a leader only when things go bad."
No, but see, I think, this was a conversation, funny enough, we had this conversation over the weekend and with a few of my friends. And I think majorly it's around the fact that the CBN did not tell us that this is what they did to ensure that the naira is appreciating over the dollar. Because all of this sounds accidental. In all honesty, that's how it feels. It doesn't look like there's any clear-cut policy that the CBN put in place. Yeah, it doesn't come off as if they did anything. It just sounds like, oh, something happened accidentally, and then the naira appreciated. And I'm even scared because I feel like the next time it will just drop, because we did not put in any structure to hold it in place. So the next time it's going to drop as if like gravity, just going to go down to 1,000 or so. So which is scary. So if the government wants us to actually give them praise for what they do, they should tell us that this is what they did. If they tell us their own part, then we understand that, oh, it is something that you did. It is not a random accident that happened in the global market, or it is not something of a flaw that happened from Wall Street in the US. It is something that you did. So it's not like the dollar is falling. It will be that the naira is appreciating. So because that's a difference. Exactly. That's a whole difference.
But some are saying maybe it's because the EFCC rates and all that.
Oh please! I don't see how that really affects exchange rates per se. Some people were arguing that it's because maybe the US is pulling out some of their dollar bills from Africa. BAM could also be a reason, but then again, all of these are just accidental policies and not something that Nigeria itself is doing.
Okay, you're talking about dollars now, and still in front of Daily Trust. Newspaper, it says, there's a story that says Adamawa Bureau de Change operators reject dollars as naira rebounds. Like, what is the implication of this?
I don't know what the full story of that is. Honestly, I didn't read that, so it might be very difficult for me to have an opinion as to what that was about. Yeah,
why they decided.
But I've not yet read that story.
All right, so let's move on to the Punch newspaper, talking about the national carrier. Domestic airlines have asked courts to terminate the federal government's Ethiopian,
Sometimes I wake up in the morning and Nigeria feels like a film critic. It is usually, I remember some time ago when I saw the news of the partnership between Nigeria and Ethiopian Air, it didn't make sense to me because you have so many local airlines operating in Nigeria, not just operating in Nigeria, some of them are even international airlines. Air Peace flies to Dubai, Asman flies to Macau, same thing with Max Air. So that means they have international standards to be in all those international airspaces. And yet, you found it fit to go to Ethiopian Airline to actually strike a deal. So Ethiopian Airline, which is a government-owned airline in Ethiopia, would have the leverage to fly locally in Nigeria. That's a big problem. That was poorly planned by the government, and I think it serves them right that those consortium of airlines are actually taking them to court, and I hope that the court will actually do justice to it, because sometimes I feel like our government officials don't think carefully and rigorously before they make certain decisions. There was this one time I made a joke with my friends. I said sometimes I imagine that while our government officials sit down to make decisions, somebody in the crowd will say, "Don't you think Nigerians will not like this?" And then somebody will just say, "I better forget about them. Let's just do what we want to do." It's crazy when we do this when we make these decisions without actually putting the rate at which we are undermined in terms of our thinking faculty or our critical thinking analysis part is from the government, from the ruling class. It's really, really appalling sometimes because this doesn't make sense. I don't see how this should have even been a thing. In Egypt, for example, if you want to do business in Egypt, you must partner with a local business. If there is no local business, you must create that local business.
Definitely.
And like a typical example I usually use is when Uber wanted to go to Egypt, they couldn't just go into Egypt and become Uber. They had to partner with Karim, there was a taxi service called Karim. They had to partner with them so that they could actually use their taxi. And it's 100% run. They run an indigenization policy where you transfer ownership to the locals of that community. We cannot be doing. I wish we could do the same in Nigeria. Construction is done by Arab contractors throughout Egypt. There's no Julius Berger there, none. All of it has to go to Arab contractors. Arab contractors are Egyptian owned, and this is how you keep money in your country. This is how you ensure that you build the capacity of your local businesses and ensure quality of service. Honestly, because I feel like if local businesses or contracting companies get most of these deals, it becomes for the love of the country, they will do something good, as opposed to the other.
So what you are saying somehow, about patronizing local and developing locally. Another story on the front page of Punch this morning speaks about $3.5 billion that it says the CBN or Nigerians have paid for foreign education under Buhari. That means in the last 7 to 8 years. How do you see this? Especially, what could have been done?
I think it goes to, that's for foreign education, I think.
Yes.
I think it goes to show you some of the things I've actually said here, that education is actually expensive, except in Nigeria. I've had friends who I told that I paid $52 to go to school, and they scream for the quality of education they feel like I received, which I don't underestimate. But if you look at how much TED Fund pulls to fund people to go to school abroad, or other scholarship bodies or other organizations, MDAs that are giving scholarship to people to go study abroad, you get to see that. I don't think it's an outrageous amount of money per se, because if you look at the cost of schooling in other countries, you get to understand that money, in fact, I don't think a lot was spent. The question now will be how many people were sent to school with that amount of money. So just to ensure there's accountability and transparency in the process.
I think this is talking about maybe the whole payments that have passed through CBN, for you to process.
Oh, the whole payment from private.
They are saying CBN releases $3.5 billion for foreign education under Buhari.
Okay, so that is still.
So what I'm saying, could we have done something different so that to avert this? Just like when we talk about medical tourism, that averting is. Could we have done something different to avert this massive outflow of this humongous amount of money to fund education in other places?
I think one of it is to ensure standard in our own university structures in the country, especially for the public universities, to ensure that people stay. But we cannot stop people from moving around to go and study. As good as Chinese education, for example, people still leave China to the US. As good as the US education, for example, people come to Ghana from the US to study. So you will never be able to stop that, because cross-cultural migration for educational purposes is always something that is not a bad thing, really, because then you get to learn more about other people and other things. But if, in terms of reducing that, I think if we can ensure that our structure of education over the past, going forward, is actually better, then that would ensure that we can actually keep more people in the country. Because I can guarantee that more people have left in the past since COVID than ever. More people have left the country for education. Some of my friends who never thought of, I'm never going anywhere, are already out of the country. They've already left for educational purposes. Some people are still in 100 levels since 2020, which does not really bode well, especially if I have plans for myself. You are thwarting that plan with a consistent and persistent strike. So that needs to actually change. The government needs to do its part, ASU needs to do their own part, and the students should also do their part as well.
Okay, so let's talk about, let's share your thoughts on Firma saying that most Nigerian roads are expired, especially with the floods that have come and gone. It has caused damage on some of these roads as well.
I remember traveling to Kaduna quite recently by the road, and a friend of mine asked me, how was your journey? And I said, the road don't come off a road. The Kaduna-Abuja road used to be one of the best roads in the country, and I don't know what went wrong. The thing is just really bad, and this is just even a pinch compared to what they are facing down south. The Auchi road is no longer even a road. It is now just a passage through the valley of shadow of death until you get to where you're going to. So the roadworthiness of the countries for most of our, the same way they check road ordinance of, is the road car worthy? That's another question. So most of the federal highways actually needs to be looked at, because I remember that after the first tenure of the president, one of the things that they campaigned with was that they've done their best to ensure that federal roads were good and all of that. But most of what is going wrong now is a testament to the failures to ensure that standards are upheld during the first tenure, because it feels like everything that they campaigned for the second tenure just came down crashing after the first tenure, just came down crashing now. So it goes to show you that it's that thing where you try to stop a force of something. Let's say a group of people that are trying to go through a door, you're trying to push them back by not settling their grievances, but then one day they break the door and just come out, and then there's just a stampede. That's what we're having right now. We're having a stampede of issues upon issues in the country, and this is due to the failed policies that the government has actually put in place over the past few years.
Yeah. Maybe before we wrap up, we have not discussed politics.
Which is very unlike us.
Exactly. So, can you look at this front page of The Nation? I think the most political newspaper these days in Nigeria. They say APC Tinubu remains a solid, reliable candidate, but not really that. The second story is talking about Wike others not keen on truce with Atiku. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the things that have happened recently. Wike leading people to go to Bauchi, and the Bauchi governors, that dilemma, as The Nation posted here.
Yeah, I think we discussed the Bauchi governors incident last week, yeah? If I'm not mistaken. The G5 governors, that sounds like a force. But like I've said consistently and persistently, is the candidates needs to, that's the flag bearer needs to look at the pros and the cons of having Wike on his side, or are you as the
scapegoat,
the chairman of the party, and how that speaks to his re-election, and on the bigger picture, which of them is actually going to be an advantage or a disadvantage. I can understand the Vice President Atiku's concern. You know, there's this pidgin English adage that says, "Na from clap, you enter dance." So sometimes if you indulge something a little, it allows room for more and more. And Wike doesn't look like somebody who would just stop at just the removal of Ali. He would want to ask for more and more and more and more. But then there's that question of how do you ensure that you put in place structures and how do you put in, not just policies, like how do you ensure that he does not come back from, if you give him the shorts, how do you expect that he doesn't come back and ask for trousers or for an agbada eventually? So I think the presidential candidates and the party leadership itself needs to take a look at it. They've tried their best, but obviously, if this thing is still dragging, I don't want to believe, I don't know him personally, but I don't want to believe that Wike is an unreasonable person. I feel like there's still something that, and one of the major things is just that the removal of IU as the chairman. That's so far to the best of our knowledge. Maybe there's something else going on that they're not telling us about, that we don't know about, if we're not in the inner we're not in the inner caucus of the party. But I feel like if IU is removed, perhaps that could actually, because he has dragged his grievance for a very long time. So if that eventually happens now, and then he comes back for another thing, everybody will be like, "Guy, you're asking for too much. And this was the one thing you wanted, it has been given to you, what else do you want?" I think that needs to actually be addressed as well.
All right, thank you so much, Mukhtar Suleiman, for taking time out to help us review the papers this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. All right, so that was Suleiman Mukhtar, public affairs analyst, joining us for the newspaper review. We'll take a break, and when we come back at the top of the hour, Daybreak continues.